Hello? Hello?
All right, let's take seats because we have a lot of people waiting on Zoom that we have communicated that we're starting a little late and we were finishing dinner. But our Zoom congregation is punctual, as you know, and they worry if we start 2 minutes late. One of the great changes of Zoom, they've imposed punctuality upon us. All right, Peter, can we let in our Zoom congregation? Awesome. They're here? Great. So, Shabbat Shalom, everyone on Zoom. Shabbat Shalom, everyone in the sanctuary. I introduced Michael Oren during our service. I'm not going to do so now. All I can say is I'm thrilled that he is here at this really delicate moment in Jewish history, and I can't think of a better person to learn from. We have not discussed format at all, but I'll say 3 things. Knowing your travel schedule, we will not go more than 45 minutes.
Go, please.
Awesome.
I'm not.
Number 2, the floor is yours, and then I'll just kind of bounce off of you and ultimately take some questions because I know a lot of people have questions. So with that, I just want to welcome you once again.
Thanks. Thank you. Thank you. All right. Thank you. Shabbat Shalom. Shabbat Shalom. Thank you for making me travel 7,000 miles and giving me falafel. Can I get a kosher hot dog? You know, Israel, with all of our great technological achievements, we have not been able to make a good hot dog. Cannot get a good hot dog in the state of Israel. It's amazing. Okay.
I should move because...
my background is in history. I've been a historian for many years. And I will tell you that history can be very hard. History is hard. History's hard. And when history hits you suddenly, dramatically, violently, nothing can really prepare you for history. If you're a Jew in 1492 and one day you find out that the country your ancestors have lived in for 1,000 years is suddenly kicking you out, that's history hitting very hard. If you're a Jew in 1933 and you wake up and find out that Hitler's been elected chancellor and Germany you've known is now not Germany anymore but Nazi Germany, that's history hitting very hard. Nothing can prepare you for that. If you're an Israeli Jew in 1973, October 6th, and you wake up and you find out the Egyptian army and the Syrian army have invaded us in the south and the north, and that everything's going to change, that's history hitting very, very hard. And nothing prepares you for it. History hit us extremely hard on the morning of October 7th. Extremely hard. And nothing prepared us for it. But on October 5th, 2 days before, I was in Dallas. And I was giving a corporate speech. Occasionally I speak in front of corporations. I was a large real estate company. Not Jews, not a Jewish group. And I stunned my audience by saying, Israel will soon be going to war. Now, I am not a prophet. And there's only one thing worse than being a false prophet. It's being an accurate prophet. Read the book of Jonah. All right? He didn't like it either. He preferred to be in the fish. Why did I say in Dallas on October 5th that Israel was going to war? Because there were a number of dots that were connectable. And I wasn't the only one to connect them. The dot began with America's efforts to effect a treaty, a rapprochement between Israel and Saudi Arabia. It really, again, Joe Biden at it, right? And truly, what could possibly be any negative fallout from making peace between Israel and the most prestigious and influential Muslim Arab country? But there was a downfall, and that was Iran. The last thing Iranians wanted to see was a joint Saudi-Israeli strategic front facing them, and also an economic front. They're talking about making a train that was going to go from Haifa to Jeddah. I think the Iranians are just going to sit there and let that happen? No. But even worse, from an Iranian perspective, was the possibility of Saudi nuclearization, because part of this agreement was going to be some type of American support for a Saudi nuclear program, and the last thing that the Iranians wanted was to see a nuclear-empowered Saudi Arabia. The Iranians looked at Israel, and we were divided. We were divided in every which way we could be divided. We were divided over the government's plan to overhaul the judiciary, hundreds of thousands of people out in the street protesting, thousands of reservists saying they're not going to report for duty and protest. But that was like the presenting problem wasn't the problem. Beneath that problem were divisions between Orthodox and secular Jews, between Mizrahim, Eastern Jews, and Ashkenazim, between left-wing, right-wing, between Tel Aviv and the periphery. Every possible division you could imagine where we were being rent in many different ways. And the Iranians saw this and said, an opportunity. The Iranians looked at America and saw America polarized, paralyzed, unable to elect the Speaker of the House. Isolationist, as I mentioned before, the only thing Democrats and Republicans agreed on was not to get involved in a foreign war. And the Iranians say, okay, we have fears, we have opportunities, let's take advantage of the moment, and let's trigger a little war. So I got this. I told this at Dallas. This is 48 hours before October 7th. I got one major thing wrong. I thought it would start with Hezbollah in the north. Didn't occur to me that it would start with Hamas in the south. And there was a reason for this too. Back in 2017, I was the deputy to the prime minister. And one day the prime minister calls me into his office and says, I got some bad news for you. You are going to be in charge of Gaza. Like that? Note the white hair. And so what was the brief was to try to improve the quality of life for the people of Gaza and perhaps give Hamas something to lose by going to war with us. Whether it was water reclamation, sewage treatment, electricity, everything you hear about. Okay, so I had to do a crash course on Gaza, crash course. And I sat with the Shabak, our internal security people, and they what I learned this. Everything you know about human behavior, like decency, civilization, when it comes to Hamas and Gaza, you throw it straight out the window. It's completely irrelevant. In Gaza, the Iranians are the principal backers and funders of Hamas, and they own and operate their own Palestinian terrorist organization, Palestinian Islamic Jihad. All right? The Iranians are willing to fight Israel to the last Palestinian. There is Mahmoud Abbas. Mahmoud Abbas, the president of the Palestinian Authority in Ramallah. He's now in the 18th year of his 4-year term because he won't run for re-election because he knows that Hamas would win in an open election. And he's willing to fight Hamas to the last Israeli. Hamas, for its part, doesn't give a fig about anybody in Gaza. Doesn't care anything about for the people. All right? We wanted to bring water into Gaza, fresh water into Gaza. But you couldn't bring pipes into Gaza because any pipeline that goes into Gaza gets cut up for missiles, for rockets. They've dug 300 miles of tunnels beneath the surface. They went into the aquifer. They drained the aquifer. The aquifer filled up with salt water. That's why there's no water in Gaza. There's a crossing. We had a great crossing, ironically called, it was called Kerem HaShalom, the Vineyard of Peace, right? But it's a huge crossing, and it had the capacity to transfer 1,200 very large flatbed trucks of food, clothing, anything you wanted. I was in charge of the blockade. Don't let anybody tell you the blockade was starving out Gaza. The blockade was about arms and arms only. Not about food, not about toys, nothing. Not about medicine. 1,200 trucks we could move in every day. Hamas would only let 400 in. Why? Because they wanted to keep the people hungry and angry and dependent on Hamas. They didn't care. They used to use and lose about 300 children, Palestinian children, every year digging the tunnels. The tunnels, they dig, they're very sandy, the tunnels collapse, kids die. They don't care. They don't care. And somehow we were supposed to induce Hamas not to shoot rockets at us again. So the plan was, and this was not my plan, here I don't take responsibility, was to dump a lot of Qatari cash in their laps. And we're talking about a lot of cash. This went on in pallets, not in bags, not in suitcases, in pallets, bills. And we eventually led about 20,000 Gazan laborers into the country to work. We thought that would give Hamas maybe something to lose. I thought this was sufficient to keep Hamas quiet for a while. I thought the war would come from Hezbollah, and I was wrong. And not just I was wrong, everybody was wrong. The entire Israeli army, the intelligence services, the Mossad, everybody was wrong. And we all underestimated the ferocity, the inhuman sadism of these people. And it wasn't just Hamas terrorists, it was the population of Gaza that poured through the fence as well. They took 242 hostages. Not all of them in the hands of Hamas. Some of them are in the hands of Palestinian Islamic Jihad, but some in the hands of families. They have the family hostage. Hamas doesn't even know where they all are. Because the family keeps the hostage, and they plan to sell the hostage at some point. And they've done it in the past. And I don't have to go through the whole list of the atrocities. We're going to be talking about Hatzalah later. And Hatzalah was October 7th was one of the first people to arrive on the scene. These 7,000 volunteer paramedics, they just ran down there. 2 of them were killed. 2 of them were taken hostage. A number were wounded. But I spoke to them and they said, we've seen everything. We've seen bus bombings in Jerusalem. We've seen terrorist attacks everywhere. Nothing prepared us for what we saw in Gaza. Everything, one of them told me, anything you can do to a human body short of cannibalism, these people did. These people did. And they are irrevocably damaged for life, the people who saw this. Nothing prepared us for it. October 7th, I was traveling back to Israel. It was at my mother's house. And my mother's 95 years old. She lives in the same house I grew up in. And you get, there's this awful Israeli moment when you wake up and you see 15 different messages on your cell phone. They all say the same thing: "Are you okay?" And then you know something terrible has happened. And then you open up the news and you see what's happened. And at the morning of October 7th, we thought, excuse me, it sounds almost wistful today. We thought maybe 50 people were killed. Maybe a dozen people were taken hostage. Nobody at that point could even wrap their heads around the enormity of this disaster. And immediately, I have a long-standing relationship with a fund in New York that whenever there's a crisis, they put me in touch with a PR firm and they put me immediately on the news. So if you see me on the news again and again, it's because of this relationship. Already that day, I had several CNN, MSNBC, already that day, and one phone call to El Al. I got on the plane, on the first plane going back that night, and even that was an extraordinary experience because it was just rows of young people, women and men, coming back to, cutting short their vacations, cutting short their studies in the United States, coming back to serve their country in uniform. And it was such a solemn flight. The pilot speaking to us, and the flight attendant speaking to us, and and saying "Am Yisrael Chai" in this plane that was flying back, and then you land in Israel. And you land at a nation at war. And it's a strange feeling. So far, Hamas has fired over 10,000 rockets at us. And we live in South Tel Aviv. We live in Jaffa. And out of the back window of my bomb shelter in my house, I see an Iron Dome battery. And every rocket fired at Tel Aviv is intercepted literally over my house. So it's quite a show every night. And the whole place shakes. And the Iron Dome is 90% effective. But that means if you're firing 100 rockets at us, 10 get through. And some have come through in my neighborhood. One of them completely destroyed an apartment building on the next street. And these are not fireworks, these are very big rockets. You can take down an entire apartment complex, one of them. We have an ADHD cat that whenever the sirens go off, the cat bolts up the stairs into the bomb shelter. How does he know to do this? I don't know. But he did it on the first night. He understood immediately. The cat understood this, Catatonic. Extraordinary. But not everybody can take it. Not everybody can take being shelled every night. And we know people who just began to unravel. You don't know that effect. If someone is trying to shoot at you to kill you, to blow you apart, and if you internalize that, it's quite horrific. Very difficult to deal with emotionally. Your prime time, God bless you, is 7, 8, 9 o'clock at night. In Israel, it's 3, 4, 5 in the morning, and that's when I did my work in the press. And there is and I don't want to sound cynical about this, but this is going to sound cynical. There's an algorithm out there. There's a formula that says for a certain number of dead Jews, you earn a certain amount of grace in the media. So 6 million Jews in the Holocaust, you get 25 years of grace in Europe. It ends after 25 years. So we have between 1,200 and 1,400. We thought it was 1,400 people killed. That's going to buy you, on most American news stations, that's going to buy you about 2.5, 3 weeks. BBC, CBC, about a week and a half. Because at that point, immediately it goes over from focus on Jewish suffering to focus on Palestinian suffering to the point today where October 7th is not even mentioned. Not even mentioned. And I've done this now. I've been involved in what we call public diplomacy for many years now, and I've witnessed the same process in every war, starting with the Second Lebanon War in 2006, through our 5 wars with Gaza, the same process. The terrorists shoot at us. They kill some of us. In this case, they killed an awful lot of us. And they get credit. They get credit for killing us. Great, we killed Jews. Remember that guy talking to his mother and saying, "Mom, Dad, I just killed 10 Jews with my own hands. Aren't you proud of me?" Okay, they get credit. Then they get us to shoot back at them. They hide behind their civilian population, so we kill inadvertently. We have no choice. We end up killing Palestinian or Lebanese civilians. And so we get branded as war criminals. So the terrorists win twice over. And they're very clever. They have this military tactic. This is a military tactic. Then becomes a media, diplomatic, and legal strategy. Okay? Follow this, okay? Shooting back and forth. They kill us. We kill them. We're branded as war criminals. Then the media comes in, and they take pictures of this, of all the difficult, the pain, the children who are maimed and hurt and killed, and the body bags, everything. They take pictures of this. This gets on the news. And that then becomes a diplomatic strategy because the pictures trigger demonstrations throughout the world. You see, boom, 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 just like this every single time. They trigger the demonstrations, and the demonstrations escalate, and they put pressure on the government. Then this is the diplomatic stage. And then the diplomatic stage becomes a legal stage because those governments then go into the General Assembly and later still into the Security Council where the resolutions are more binding, and they impose a ceasefire. What does a ceasefire mean? It means that the terrorists get away scot-free. And the message gets out to the world, particularly to our friends the Iranians, that they can shoot us with impunity. And when we try to defend ourselves, the world's going to tie our hands and make sure we get beat up. They will erode our right to defend ourselves. They'll erode ultimately our right to exist as a sovereign Jewish state. These guys are smart. They may be sadists. They may be worse than anything in the animal kingdom. But they're not dumb. And they do this time after time again. Every single time, our legitimacy gets whittled away a little bit more, a little bit more. So much so that, I was on the news. Excuse me. It's that falafel. It's a killer. If you looked at the news in the last 48 hours, every time Israel or Israel's IDF spokesman makes an assertion, the New York Times, CNN, MSC says the following: the assertion could not be independently confirmed. Get that? So we find a bunch of guns in Shifa Hospital, we lay them out, and New York Times will say, well, we don't know where the guns really came from. They could have been brought in by the Israel. That's the implication is that these guns were brought in and staged. Could not be everything. If Israel says it rained, they're going to say it can't be independently certified, all right? Confirmed. Hamas says 11,000 civilians have been killed in Gaza. 50% of them children. Do they ever once say that number could be confirmed? Not once. I haven't seen it one time. We've got them finally to say that the Hamas-controlled Gazan health ministry, that was a big battle, by the way. Big battle. But they will never say it can't be confirmed because it can't be confirmed. And we know that Hamas routinely inflates all of its levers. Remember the Ahli hospital bombing? 500 people killed in the hospital. It wasn't in the hospital, it was in the parking lot. It was like 50 people killed. It was still 50 too many, and we didn't do it. In 2008, 2009, during the Cast-Lead operation, I was in there as a reserve officer. We got a note one night that Hamas said that an Israeli mortar shell had fallen in an UNRWA school and killed 51 students. 51 students. No mortar shell, no UNRWA school, no 51. Completely made up. But the entire world reported it. So you can see this happening. We have zero credibility. Zero. And this is just what the Hamas wants. This is according to their playbook. And I see it every time A, B, C professors like this. Now, the big danger is going to be the ceasefire. And as I mentioned earlier in my remarks, a ceasefire means Hamas gets away with mass murder. It means we die. We basically die. It's an existential issue for us. Why? We have 250,000 Israelis who have been made homeless by this, both in the north and in the south. And we can't send them back to their homes. If Hamas can regroup and rearm, and with the number 3 man in Hamas just said the other day that we're going to do this second time, third time, fourth time, how do you do that? How do you get anybody to live in the South? The South is 62% of the country, by the way, the South. How do you get them to live in the North? Who's going to live in Kiryat Shmona? Who's going to live in Metula? Who's basically going to live anywhere? And we'll have no regional deterrence power either, because then everyone in the region is going to understand that we are, basically a punching bag. Very difficult. And we're hanging on this ceasefire because it's very difficult. Ceasefire is a wonderful thing. Who could possibly be against a ceasefire? People are shooting each other. How can you not be against a ceasefire? It's the end of war. How do you actually make the case in the world that you have to give war a chance? Sorry, John Lennon. All right? You have to give war a chance because you have to give a war a chance. During the days, in my few waking hours, I'm a member of 2 NGOs. One of them, I'm a president of an NGO that supports the border police, and particularly the bereaved families of border police. We lost 58 policemen. Most recently, we lost this beautiful young woman from Atlanta, Rose Lubin, 19 years old, good Jewish family in Atlanta. Her parents, David, I spoke with her parent, who was in Jerusalem. She went off and joined a combat unit of the border police. They do amazing jobs, and she was stabbed to death in Jerusalem. But I also went to a funeral for another 19-year-old, Retav Asayeg, who was in a combat unit, but it had only been like 2 weeks in the army. And when the terrorists attacked the village she was defending in the south, she rushed at them and killed 3 of them before she herself was shot, and saved that village. She saved that village, and I went to that funeral. And then another NGO arose to make connection with the families of the hostages. And together with a psychologist, I visited a number of these families. It was devastating. It wasn't heartbreaking. It was soul-crushing, soul-crushing. And you could imagine having a child, a 5-year-old child. I visited one woman who has 2 children, a 15-year-old and an 8-year-old, living in Hamas hell for 5-6 weeks. You have no idea where they are. No idea. In many cases, because the Red Cross hasn't visited the hostages, we don't even know if they're actually hostages. So I visited the family of Roni Eshel in Lower Galilee. Again, a 19-year-old soldier, a couple of weeks in the army. They didn't even know if she had been kidnapped or not, if she'd been taken hostage. She just was missing. I visited a wonderful woman named Adi Marciano. What a strong woman, whose daughter Noah, also a new soldier in the army, was taken hostage. They had pictures. Someone had caught her, on a camera. They knew that she had been taken hostage. On the way up to Toronto the other day, I'm good. The other day, I found out that Roni Eshel's body was finally identified. 5 weeks later, it took 5 weeks to identify her body. She had been so badly burned. And then yesterday, of course, on the news, they found Noah Marciano's body. And so all of this is intensely, intensely personal. I found out that the rabbi who married my daughter, Rabbi Solti, had 2 sons, gorgeous boys, both of them reserve officers, married with kids. On the morning of October 7th, they heard about the fighting, they got into their uniforms, they kissed their kids goodbye, they went down to the south, and both of them were killed that morning. And my rabbi ended up burying his 2 kids side by side in Jerusalem. Tamal Kedim, wonderful girl with a long braid, was in my kids' scout troop, was in their karate group growing up. She, her husband, 3 children, all shot and killed. All of it intensely personal. Everybody we know is in the army. 1 out of every 10 Israelis is in the army. 360,000 reservists were called up. That'd be equivalent to about 35 million Americans in the army. The equivalent of. Hard to imagine, even fathom it. The height of what's twice as what was in World War II. Why? And 12 to 14 100 dead Jews is the equivalent of about 50 to 52,000 Americans killed in one day. Almost as many Americans killed in the entire Vietnam War in one day. Can we wrap our heads around this? Can we wrap our heads around this? And it's not over. It's not over. We're not even at the end of the beginning. At the end of the beginning. We don't know what's going to happen up north. Remember I said earlier that I thought it would start with Hezbollah. It may end with Hezbollah. You can all get my Substack. It's called Clarity. It's free. And I publish articles on these there that I usually wouldn't publish in many open publications. One of my earliest articles was called If Not Now, When? And this is before Israel's grand incursion began in Gaza. I suggested that we should contain Hamas in Gaza because it wasn't going anywhere and focus on Hezbollah. Because Hezbollah as a force is about 15 times more powerful than Hamas is, has 150 rockets. They're bigger rockets, they're longer range rockets, they're more accurate rockets. It also has a terrorist force of 100,000 men who have been assiduously massacring Syrians for the last decade. So they massacred 500,000 Syrians. What do you think they're going to do to us? And so I thought maybe we should address Hezbollah first. Okay? It came up for a vote in the Israeli government. It turned out that the Defense Department and the Army favored my position. When I first came out with this article, it was only a few days into the war, people were kind of skeptical at me, but the Prime Minister turned it down. I think that also the Biden administration wasn't thrilled about it. They didn't want to drag those two carrier groups into a direct combat, and they probably would. But my fear is that Hezbollah will wait till our army is tired, in combat for weeks, low on ammo, more on that in a second, and then they'll strike. And then they'll strike with our international legitimacy already whittled down to near to nothing. That's my fear. We're just at the beginning of this. Hold on. We're also operating against a number of clocks. Okay, ammunition. We run low in every war. We run low at every war, and in every war, we have to ask the United States for the keys. This is actually what we do. We ask for the keys to warehouses that are situated under the state of Israel, and in those warehouses are $2 billion worth of pre-positioned U.S. military hardware, including ammunition. It was put there for, during the Gulf War, for use by American forces. They're not there anymore. We're still there. And pretty much without exception, the United States lets us take these keys and go down and take what we need. We write it down, we pay for it, they replenish it. The problem is that much of those munitions, I won't say most, but much, have been transferred to Ukraine. And believe me, Hezbollah knows this. Hamas knows this. So we're up against an ammo clock. We're up against the clock of the 360,000 reservists. These are young people. These are young women, men in their 20s and 30s who are the backbone of our economy, the backbone of our high-tech sector. How many weeks? They're already now 6 weeks called up, 6 weeks away from their families. My three assistants, I have three assistants, all of them are in uniform. Two of them in Gaza, one of them is in Jericho. But they haven't been home. And one of them has kids, How long can you keep that up? And there's the clock of the hostages, as they become more and more vocal, demanding that Israel accept a ceasefire or Israel do something to try to get these hostages freed. And it's agonizing. I was saying last night in Detroit, I think it was last night in Detroit, that as an historian, I cannot recall a leadership that had to make such agonizing decisions as the Israeli leadership has to make today. Because it has to be able to say to the families, if we accept the ceasefire, we die. But if we don't accept the ceasefire, your loved ones may die. And how about that? That's like, what kind of decision is that? It's almost unbearable. I take it back. It's unbearable. It's unbearable. I do believe, though, that, and I say this guardedly, the chances of getting the hostages back are better the more we pressure Hamas. And I'd like to proceed on the assumption, again, having gotten it wrong the first time, that there's some level of reasonableness in Hamas, some level that they're actually human beings, that will say a live hostage is worth more than a dead hostage, and a healthy hostage is worth more than a harmed hostage. And if the hostages at the end of the day are our get-out-of-Gaza free card, and we may do what the PLO did in 1982, we'll trade them off and get on a boat to go somewhere, okay? that I think it would be acceptable to most Israelis. But that's assuming that at somewhere along the line they're actually rational. I don't know. I don't know. We're up against all these clocks. In the meanwhile, anti-Semitism rising throughout the world. And nothing prepared us for this. History's hard. Boy, is history hard. History's hard to the Jewish people. This is a battle not just between Israel and Hamas. It's a war against the Jewish people. It's a war against the Jewish people everywhere. One night, I went to visit my old paratroop unit. I was a paratrooper. And I went to see this unit that had been taking part in the battle of October 7th. 18-year-old kids, beautiful boys with guns, really children with guns. And they had that look of fear in their face from what they had seen, and they were going back into combat. And I sat with them for several hours, and we talked what it is to be in war, because I've been in a bunch of them. And they were just wonderful. And then I came home, and my staff had arranged a Zoom conference between with the pro-Jewish community of Cornell University. And these guys were locked into the Center for Jewish Life and threatened with death threats. And the truly harrowing thing about this experience was that the same fear I saw in the faces of those paratroopers, I saw in the faces of the kids at Cornell. 2 weeks ago, I sat with a pro-Israel group at Columbia. Same fear, the same despair that nobody cares. The same, we don't have words for this. And I can go into it more deeply, but we are at an inflection point. History can be very, very hard, can't it? But this much I know, that history, as hard as it is, history also holds out hope. And it does. And I've watched the Israeli society perform as no society on earth. I don't know a society like this, where 80% of the Israelis, of all Israelis, are volunteering in some way. Whether it's food, whether it's blood, whether it's time, whether it's this psychologist who joined me visiting these families. Everyone's visiting these families. Hosting the displaced families, reporting to duty in the reserve duty, where most units reported a call-up percentage of 150%. Okay? 150%. They won't take me. I got a bad knee. I'd go back. But you know Yitzhak Sokolov, right? He's from Sharon here. You know what he did? He's almost 70 years old. On the morning the war broke out, he got into his uniform and went down there, and they took him back at 70. He's driving a truck. He's from Sharon here. Well, he's a tour guide, yeah. He's down there. He's down there in Gaza. He writes me every day. He's almost 70 years old, but that's it's very typical. It's actually typical, these people. It is the possibility, and I'm not Pollyannish. I've been involved in the peace process now. I was an advisor to Yitzhak Rabin. I've been involved in pretty much every initiative since then. I participated in the last round of talks with the Palestinians. I'm not Pollyannish, but if there's ever a chance for moving anywhere the needle on the Palestinian peace issue, it's now. Palestinians have an opportunity to be free of Hamas. That's no small thing. It's no small thing. And we have to be very smart, and we have to be very perceptive how we can move forward. I think we can. I'll be writing about it this week. And Israel will come through this. We will all come through this stronger and more united. There's a great reckoning. We'll get through the reckoning. But that reckoning is very, very necessary. It is a cleansing period. The horrible irony, the historic, hard, hopeful irony of this whole thing is that it took Hamas to remind us who we were. It took Hamas to overcome all those divisions within Israeli society. It took Hamas to overcome the divisions between Israel and parts of the American Jewish community, right? And that demonstration in Washington, that extraordinary event, to see that, we almost want to say thank you to these horrible people for bringing us together in this way. But let's take this moment and realize that as hard as history is, history also holds out hope. And there are positive sides to history as well. I personally, and I'll end with this, is, I've been living in Israel for a very long time already. It's coming up to a half century. And the Israel I came to, in the 1970s was, a poor country. Our biggest export item was orange juice. We had, our biggest export was orange juice. He had no relations with anybody, no relations with India, China, Soviet Union, Africa, no relations with Africa. South America, we had a nice relationship with the United States, but not a strategic alliance. no peace with Egypt, no peace with Jordan, certainly not the Abraham countries. You cannot have lived my life. You cannot have been an historian and knew what Israel was like on May 14th, 1948, a country with nothing, like nothing, no resources, no allies, nothing, and see what Israel had become and not be optimistic. Just can't be. As horrible as this period is, as hard as history is, you understand that our history, whether in 1492, 1993, 1973, in every case we bounce back. We just do. We're a remarkably resilient people. And we will bounce back. We will be stronger. We'll be more united. But we won't forget. We'll mourn. We will mourn. And we'll fight when we have to fight. But we are the Jewish people, and we are a nation, and we are a family. We're mishpucha. Am Yisrael Chai. We'll live. Chai.
Thank you so much. There's water back here.
Oh, water.
If you'd like.
Any question?
I want to begin
kasher.
with one that represents the whole, as I've received many questions over the last few weeks. And I ask you as a historian and a student of the American Jewish community, we are watching a tremendous uptick in anti-Semitism. There's an increased fear in our community, especially amongst our college students. You've observed it at the UN. As a historian, has something changed, or is this consistent with what we've witnessed in the last 70-some years?
And the answer to that is yes. Something's changed and something's consistent. Okay. Obviously, anti-Semitism is consistent because anti-Semitism, the oldest hatred is the only. We're getting. I call it the infilating fire. If you're in the army, the thing you always fear the most is inflated fire. It's machine guns coming from two different directions. We're the only, minority group that gets hated by the right and the left. Okay. And you never know who you're going to get. Who, whether it's neo-Nazis and the Proud Boys or whatever coming at you, or the extreme left. We're hated by other minorities too. It is unique hatred, and if you're a cosmopolitan, then Jews are nationalists. If you're a nationalist, the Jews are cosmopolitan. If you're a communist, they're capitalists. If you're a capitalist, they're communists. You got to get the whole thing. That's it. We cannot win. That's all the same. What is different is the insanity gripping this country. And that insanity has been going on for a while, and it's very deep. And you can see it in the outpouring of love for Osama bin Laden's letter, if you're following this whole thing. That's insanity. It's insanity of people accusing Israel of genocide and defending the actual perpetrators of genocide. That's insanity. It's insanity, people thinking that Hamas has something to do with peace, or that Hamas is a byproduct of the absence of peace. It absolutely is not. Hamas goes out, every time we try to make peace, it's Hamas who kills Israelis and Palestinians. Okay, so it's the same. And it's not even about, it's a general insanity. And again, I don't want to go into politics. I'm not a citizen of this country anymore, but I listen to Donald Trump, and that's insane. It's insanity. It's not politics even. And that has put a different edge on this. And so I've been saying something I think rather radical. And I've come to this conclusion over my 2 weeks of traveling here that American Jews have three choices. You can fight, and you can fight. You can fight in the press. You can make sure that they don't use the M word, meaning militant, okay? Because that's pure anti-Semitism. The only reason Hamas terrorists be called militants is because they're killing Jews. Anybody doing that to any other people in the world be called terrorists because they're killing Jews. Or even the Hamas, the Gaza health ministries, believe it or not, that's anti-Semitic. Why? Because no one ever say ISIS health ministry. No one would say Al-Qaeda as a credible source. It's only because it's about Jews. Even saying that the 11,000 is in some level anti-Semitic, because behind it lurks the medieval tropes of blood libel, of the massacre of the innocents, right? Everything. I can see the anti-Semitic tropes behind the headlines. You can fight back in the press. You can fight back in the legislature. I don't understand, for the life I understand, how a person carrying a flag for a organization that is recognized as a terrorist organization by the United States of America, and that person calling for the destruction of the Jewish people, why that person's not in jail? I just don't understand it. If it was any other people, that they'd be arrested. If they were doing this against black people, if they're doing this against LGBT people, they'd be arrested. It'd be a hate crime. And it'd be incitement to violence. So you can do that there. You can fight back at these universities, and they fought back at the universities. The reason these changes happened in, I guess, Brandeis and in Columbia, and later in Harvard and Penn, because the donors said, listen, we're not going to give you another cent. And Columbia actually had to cancel its donor day, because no one was going to come. They're going to throw a donor party, no one's going to come. You can fight back. Is it perfect? No. Could it be a Pyrrhic victory? It could be. All right? But you can fight. The other and you can all disagree with me on this, the other alternative, the other choice would be to hide. Take the missiles off your door. Don't listen to the news. Someone spits in your face, turn the other way, and just, hide. You don't have to deal with all this stuff. And the third option is move to the state of Israel. Because frankly, I feel more secure there. I gave a talk, I gave one university lecture this tour down in Florida, and as ambassador, I had a couple of, Secret Service agents, I had a couple of Israeli guys with, big muscles. I had not a dozen, I had dozens of policemen, plainclothesmen, FBI agents, and an armored car following me around this university. It was crazy. I couldn't even lecture in the same hall with students. They had to live stream it. Someone asked me if I was rowing. Who's asked me if I was rowing today? Did you have someone ask me if I was still rowing? I'm still a rower, all right? And I asked them to arrange a little row in the mornings for me. When I went off a row, I had to have a police boat accompany me while I rowed. That's the state of the lack of security. You don't have that in Israel. I feel more secure with the rockets going over my house in Tel Aviv than I did down in the university in Florida. So you can move to the state of Israel. And I think that we're going to have a significant amount of aliyah next year. I do. So those are the options. I don't have great news.
All right, let's open it up to questions. The key word in that last sentence was questions. Not statements, questions. Tony.
So I appreciate your remarks.
I'm going to just repeat as best as I can your question because Zoom won't pick you up.
So you had foresight to say Israel's going to go to war.
Right.
I appreciate your foresight now. Where does all of this go from here?
So for Zoom, where does all of this go from here?
I don't know. I know it's a long time. We're going to have to, the 300 miles of tunnels, that would have been easily solvable by flooding the tunnels or putting something flammable in the tunnels and throwing in a match. We can't do it because of the hostages. And so we have to go tunnel. One of my assistants lost 4 of his friends the other day in one of these tunnels. Okay? He says everything's booby-trapped. He says the Coke cans are booby-trapped. Everything's booby. We found this one shaft outside the Shifa hospital. We can't get down it. We can't get down to the shaft because it's all booby-trapped. It took a very long time. And we don't know what's going to happen with Hezbollah. We do not know. But I would plan on an operation going on for many weeks right now. And that's assuming there's no, wild cards. One of the wild cards that keep me awake at night, not just me, is what I call the Kfar Kana syndrome. Okay, Kfar Kana is a village in southern Lebanon. Back in 1996, we had an operation against Hezbollah called Operation Grapes of Wrath. It was very funny because it was the only Israeli operation named for a quote from the New Testament. They named it Grapes of Wrath, thought they would be really smart, and then said, hey, where's it from in the Torah? And we're looking. Finally, it's the book of Matthew. All right? Grapes of Wrath. During Grapes of Wrath, one of our tank shells hit a UN shelter and killed 100 refugees. Operation ended, Hezbollah won. 10 years later, 2006, Second Lebanon War, same place, Kfar Kana. We hit a building, 70 people were killed, the entire operation changed. When you have an army that is as big as our army in Gaza, heavily built up area, still a lot of civilians around, right? The chances of another Kfar Kana incident grows every day, especially if the troops get tired and get scared. And they shoot first and ask questions later. I've been there, I know what it's like. You shoot. You don't sit around and wait. We're also going to run up against the question of the physical privations of the refugees. We're talking about 1 million Palestinians at least who are going to be outside during the winter, and winter's coming. And already today they're talking about starvation and lack of water. That's another clock. It's a clock. We don't know. So my answer, this is my long way of explaining to you why I don't know. What I do know is that we're determined. And we haven't seen Israeli society buckle at all and saying, okay, this is enough. No, not. Everybody understands, almost everybody understands, that this is an existential moment for us. And that if we stop now, we really can't go on with our lives. Paying off these terrorists is just not an option. You have to destroy them. You have to. I defer. Katonti, as they say. Katonti. Okay.
Question for you is about the economy in Israel. What is going on?
Costing us many, many, many millions every day.
So just a word about the economy in
Yeah.
Israel. Can it sustain?
First of all, there's no tourism. Foreign investment is down about 85%. My son is a startupist, and many of his major investors have pulled out. It's not ruinous yet, but it is very agonizing.
So where does that go? Where does that end?
Well, I was intimated before that this is a workforce. Our whole, our professional workforce is in uniform and fighting. And many of these people, many of them are from, because they're, combat soldiers, and they tend to be from the best part of society. That best part of society is high tech. And it's, that is another clock. I mean, it's a clock. Going back to your question, sir.
Neil.
First of all, thanks so much for being here with us. I'm curious if you started out speaking as a prophet, if you could prophesy a bit about the domestic situation, the very strong right worship that we saw.
Right.
Very, very troubling.
That's an interesting question. I know where you're getting to. What's going to happen? How is it going to impact internal politics? So right now, the polls show that people like Benny Gantz, Naftali Bennett, who are not associated with the right, would win Netanyahu and the Likud by a wide margin. Now, having said that doesn't necessarily translate into right and left. Okay, it has to do with the people trusting Netanyahu and the Likud, and they don't anymore. And they trust more Benny Gantz, and they certainly trust Naftali Bennett. When it comes down to the peace process issue, a large share of Israelis, and I'm talking about Israelis in the center and even center left, are going to say, are you out of your mind? Okay, who's our presumptive partner is Mahmoud Abbas, 18 years in the 4-year term, the man who just before this war gave one of the most anti-Semitic speeches in history. People forget this. He's a rabid anti-Semite. He blamed the Jews for bringing on the Holocaust themselves, and then he denied it. Denied that there was a Holocaust, but the Jews are responsible for it. Who's thoroughly corrupt, has no power. And if you were to make him the presumptive interlocutor for a two-state solution, and they get a state in the West Bank, it's going to turn into Hamas within 2 days. And I look out of the back of my bomb shelter window, and I see the Hebron Hills from South Tel Aviv. All right, so we won't be in rocket range; we'll be in rifle range. No one's going to do that. I don't care who's prime minister. No one's going to do that. And so it's not about right and left. It's about credible government and legitimate government. It's a good trivia question. Here's a good trivia. I'll get you. Everyone knows who the commander-in-chief of the U.S. Armed Forces is. Who is the commander-in-chief of the IDF? Silence. So it's not the chief of staff. It's not the defense minister. It's not the prime minister. The commander-in-chief of the IDF is the Israeli government. We go to war on a consensual basis. And so the government has to have a tremendous amount of legitimacy to tell people to go out and fight. Here you have a government that's not, has very right-wing people, but has the highest percentage of ministers who never served in the army. And they're telling our kids to go out and fight. That's a hard one. It's a hard one to swallow. You'd be surprised to hear how many ministers and who they are who didn't serve in the army. That's a hard one. So the political landscape is going to change, but I don't know how much that's going to impact the diplomatic landscape. I hope it will in some way, but that's me.
So I do want to give you a chance to address United Hatzalah.
I do.
One at a time, but I want to ask a question from the college students that I received who feel incredibly alone in this moment. And you served at the UN.
U.S. I wasn't in UN. That's an easier job. I want that job. That you work 3 months a year and you give a couple speeches.
Excellent.
I never got a break. I never slept a night.
So in your service, were there moments of feeling alone? And what would your advice be?
Oh, first we have family, which is always nice. You have a few friends. But for me, it's a spiritual question. It's always a spiritual question. And I can't tell you this whole story, but when I was in Knesset, I worked a lot with Shimon Peres, and I was invited to give a sermon for the high holidays at a couple of Reform and conservative shuls in California. And I went out there and I wrote this whole speech about being a kid. I was dyslexic. I'm still dyslexic. I had all sorts of learning disabilities, but from a very early age, I had a personal relationship with God, and I spoke in the sermon about how my relationship with God and helped me get over my disabilities, and guided me throughout life. And I'm giving the sermon, and someone gives me a little note saying that Shimon Peres had died, and I had to run back to Israel for his funeral. But on the way to the plane, I stopped at the consulate in Los Angeles and made a video of my sermon that they could give to these synagogues. And someone leaked it to the Israeli press. And right after the funeral, I found out that I was the laughing stock of the state of Israel, like the laughing stock. Because first of all, Israeli politicians never talk about anything wrong with them. Everything's perfect. And secondly, they never talk about a relationship with God. You can be a Haredi and never talk about a relationship. You talk about your mitzvot, but you don't talk about God, okay? And so I was a laughing stock for a couple days, and some years later, I led a inter-party delegation to the prayer breakfast in Washington, which is 4,000 people from around the world. It's usually, the leaders of both parties up on the dais talking about their relationship with Jesus, and everyone's talking about their relationship with God. And after this, the people in the Knesset members come up to me and said, "Oh, God, now we know what you were talking about. We thought you were merely insane." You can read this. There was an article I published in Tablet. I think what they call it, "Are Politicians Who Believe in God Insane?" or something like crazy. You can read, they gave them some crazy title, but that's the story in there. I say all this because that's how you get these things. It's always a relationship with God. And I've had it ever since I was a kid. And honestly, 10 cities in 14 days. At the end of it, every one of these nights that are not so easy, sometimes we're also dealing with very, very painful issues, I always say thank you. I say thank you for the opportunity to serve. That's what it's about. It's all schut. It's all schut, folks. It's all privilege. It's all privilege. What? Okay, so we talked about volunteerism. I mentioned before about this extraordinary country. I've been talking about schut. I've had a great privilege of being associated with Hatzalah for several years now, and I'm a man of words, but I don't have many to describe this organization. We're talking about 7,000 paramedics, Arabs, Jews. There are now increasing number of Arabs, Haredim, Chilonim, secular Jews, who are available 24/7. They go through a very intensive training. And once they sign on, that's it. No matter what they're doing at any hour, it doesn't matter. That buzzer rings, they get on what's called an ambucycle. And we have about 1,500 ambucycles. These are motorcycles that have everything an ambulance has except for bed. And if you're in a city, they can get to you within 90 seconds. If you're in the countryside, they get to you within 3 minutes. And if you've had a heart attack, they're going to save you. They get something at the order of 180,000 calls a year, and they save thousands of people, and I've seen them save them. I've seen them save them in my neighborhood. And, in the normal course of things, their budget is immense. They have these huge warehouses out in Beersheba that has everything. Everything. It works better than any military base I've seen. But on October 7th, when these people ran to the border, and I mentioned before, 2 of them were killed and 2 of them were taken prisoners and others were wounded, 90% of the stocks disappeared in one day. And so quickly, not just me, some other people also ran, to the United States to try to raise some funds for this. And all I can say is that every dollar you give to this organization is actually saving a human life. And there's not many Not many causes like that in the world, but you know it goes exactly to saving a human life. And I know just how many dollars it takes to save a human life. And I don't have words for these people. I'm in awe of them. And I sit with them, and there's women who are wearing, wigs and hijabs. Really, the trauma unit is amazing. It's half Haredi women, half Muslim women. And amazing. So anything you can do for Hatzalah, that's why I'm here. And that's also a zchut for me. Everything's zchut.
Thank
Zchut
you
means
so
privilege.
much.
Means privilege. Good Hebrew word.
Thank you.
Bye-bye. Thank you. Bye-bye. Yeah.
There is dessert outside. I hope you can
Dessert.
stay a little bit.
Thanks, sir.
And then thank you, everyone. Shabbat shalom. Good Shabbos.
I like this thing. I should get you one of these. That's so much easier. I wish it was the UN. I wish it was the UN. That was a good job.